Hi, this is Maggie from Crafts the Charm. Thank you for stopping by my channel. I'm so glad you're here. And today what I want to do is create a pillow for Valentine's Day. And my pillow is going to be Paris themed, and it's going to be a sort of kitschy Paris theme. It's really based on my feelings about Paris from my childhood, from reading books like Babar and Madeline. So it might not be a very realistic Paris themed pillow, but it's one that's going to conjure fond memories and feelings for me. So to start, I looked on Wikimedia Commons and I looked on FreePic for some clip art that I could use. And on FreePic, I would recommend just searching, well, for whatever you're looking for. So if you're looking specifically for a bistro table, search on that. If you're looking for the Eiffel Tower, search on that. Or if you just want Paris, search on that. And I only used from FreePic an Eiffel Tower and a heart that I found. I downloaded a lot of other things, a little cafe tables, a bicycle, but I didn't end up using them on this pillow. And on Wikimedia Commons, what I was searching for was postcards, and I found 3 pretty postcards with postmarks. One has a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and I downloaded those. I'll include those on my blog, so you can have those postcards if you want. You won't have to search through all the postcards on Wikimedia Commons. The postcards that I chose are in the public domain. And what I'm going to do with these elements is print them onto fabric. So I did bring them into Photoshop and edit them a little bit, resize them to get the elements that I wanted. And to print them, I'm going to use freezer paper. So you're going to want to use freezer paper because it has a plastic coating on it. And the freezer paper that I have here is 18 inches wide. I'm going to need 8.5 by 11 inch sheets. So I cut a 12-inch piece of the freezer paper. This gives me a little wiggle room. And then I cut that in half, so I have 2 9 by 12-inch pieces of paper. I then ironed that with the shiny side, the plastic side, to the back of the fabric that I want to print on. Your fabric may not have a back and a front, but if it does, you want to iron to the back of it so that you're printing on the front. Now the fabric that I chose to use is I used a muslin for my postcards to give them a sort of old-timey look. And I used a pink for my Eiffel Tower and my hearts. You can cut the fabric before you do this or after. I've done it both ways. But once you've got it ironed on, now you're going to want to cut it down to an 8.5 by 11 inch piece. And you're going to want to get that pretty precise. Now to print those, it's of course going to depend on your printer, but I opened up my printer settings and chose either thick or thicker paper. And I did it both with the manual feed and with the tray. If the manual feed didn't work, I resorted to the tray, which sometimes wrinkled the paper. I am printing on a laser printer, and it's black and white. This is an older printer that I have, which I don't mind using for craft projects because it's not my primary printer. I believe you can also do this with an inkjet, and a color inkjet would be really nice because you would retain the color in the images that you're printing. Once you have successfully printed your images, you can just peel that freezer paper off the back of the fabric. And then I'm going to be cutting my images out and adhering them to my pillow fabric. So what I'm going to use is Wonder Under. It's a double-sided fusible interfacing. So you would then just follow the package instructions on your fusible interfacing. For Wonder Under, you apply the rough side to the back of your fabric, so the not printed side, and 10 or 15 seconds of heat. I think it's at the wool setting. That will adhere it to your fabric, and you will still have a paper backing that you'll probably want to keep, and then you can cut your images out. Now for my pillow, I'm using a pillow form that I made, so it's sort of an unusual size. So I'm going to cut one piece of fabric for the front of the pillow, which is 16 by 18 inches. And that's a little bit larger than the pillow. I accounted for a 1/2 inch seam allowance on all sides, but I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's better to cut your pieces of fabric the same size as your pillow form. That way your pillow will appear much more full and stuffed. And then I cut 2 pieces for the back, and those were the width 16 by, I think I cut them 13 each. So I'm just going to have an envelope pillow, I think is what it's called, or it just opens in the back and you can stuff your pillow form inside. So with the front of my pillow, I laid out the pieces on it, and I did ultimately decide to use just an Eiffel Tower piece and 3 postcards, and then some hearts. And I wanted to have something behind it that looked sort of like watercolor paint. So this went through a lot of evolutions. I'm going to tell you quickly what I did so we can get to the final thing. Maybe you would like one of the stages in between better. But I wanted to have that sort of watercolor look behind it, and I decided to use blue instead of a red or other color that might be more Valentine's-y. And I started with some blue infusible ink, and I tried to cut that to look like brushstrokes. But ultimately, I just painted over it with blue paint. So I kept adding to it until I had the size that I wanted for behind my elements. I also wrote on the pillow, I wrote Je t'aime, I wrote it out just in my own terrible cursive handwriting, and then painted over it. So it's subtle, but it's there. It's an element on the pillow. And then with my postcards, because they are black and white, I lost all of the beautiful colors in the postmarks. I painted over the postmarks with the blue paint. And for one of the postcards, which does not have a postmark, I just painted around the border of it with watered down blue paint. So I just related those postcards back to that background color. Once I had all of those pieces sort of figured out, and once they had dried, I adhered them to the pillow, again by following the instructions for the Wonder Under, which is the fusible interfacing that I used. And with Wonder Under, what you do is you use a damp press cloth, you remove the paper backing, and then use a damp press cloth, and that's for longer than the original pressing. So that's for more like 30 seconds, I think. So I started with the Eiffel Tower and the postcards. They are overlapped a little bit, the postcards, and then I put some hearts on top of that. And then I just wanted this to have a little bit of dimension to it. So I took some eyelash yarn in the tinsel color, and I got that at the Dollar Tree, and I just sewed it around the edges of the postcards. So I used some thread that is gray, a very similar color to that tinsel eyelash yarn. And I just laid the eyelash yarn down along the edges of the postcards and just sewed over it with the thread. I didn't want to sew the eyelash yarn through the pillow because then there would be visible stitches. I just wanted it as a border around all of my postcards. And another thing I did is I decided that my Eiffel Tower just didn't pop enough against the pillow, so I actually went over most of the lines of that, at least the thicker lines, with a black Sharpie. I just wanted to be able to see the Eiffel Tower a little bit more. So once the front of the pillow was basically what I wanted, I decided to assemble the pillow, and I'm going to put piping on this pillow. If I had known I was going to use paint and not infusible ink, I would have tried to match the color of the fabric that I'm using for the piping. I'm going to use this sort of teal color, which is a fat quarter from the Dollar Tree. So it's another color being introduced that's kind of relates to the color on the pillow, but not really. So what I did was I ironed this flat, and then I cut 4 2-inch strips the long way, the 21-inch length way. And that gave me enough fabric to go all the way around the pillow. And then I sewed those strips together to make one long strip. I always have to think about this part. I always have to think about how to sew the strips together when you're making the fabric for piping. To do that, you're going to lay the 2 strips together at a 90-degree angle. And you're going to sew across them diagonally. The trick for me is just getting that diagonal stitch correct, because you want to sew from the bottom left corner to the upper right corner, at least if you're looking at me sewing the way I have my pieces laid together. And that way, when you fold the piece that's pointing up, it folds down and you have a diagonal stitch. You just don't want straight stitches, or I just never see straight stitches on piping. I always see those diagonal stitches, and that's the way you achieve them. So I sewed that together, and then once I had the strip of fabric, I sewed the piping into the fabric, and I did this with a zipper foot, For this step, do not go back across the edges. You want to just baste this because you're going to want to be able to open up the ends of it, and don't stitch too closely to the piping. So once I had that done, I clipped it to the front of my pillow, and you're going to want to clip the piping at the corners, not the piping itself, but the edge of it, so that it's easy to turn it around the corners. And you're going to baste it down to the front of the pillow. And this is where you're going to join the two ends. So once you get to where the two ends join, I did it at the bottom of my pillow, then you're going to trim the piping to exactly the correct length. And you're going to wrap the fabric from one piece over the other piece. So one piece basically will insert into the other piece, fold over your fabric, and wrap it around the other piece, and then finish your stitching. For the pieces on the back of the pillow, I just folded over the tops of them twice and did a straight stitch for a hem. And then I assembled everything. So I took my front piece and then I laid the two back pieces overlapping on top of that, right sides together, and clipped that and then sewed all around the edge of the pillow. And this time, get as close to that piping as you can as you sew around. Now, once I had finished the pillow, here's what it looks like. I still felt like the front of it wasn't complete. I had debated whether to add something to the front. And I had bought two different pink fabrics, and originally thought that this other pink fabric, which is kind of this pretty swirly fabric, I thought that that would be my background originally. And then I decided it just didn't have that kitschy vibe I wanted. But what I decided to do was print some hearts in different sizes on this fabric, and then cut them out and adhere them to the front of the pillow just to give it a little more zing. So here's what that looks like with the additional hearts on it. So I'm not too sure about this pillow. I would love to know what you think. I would love to hear your suggestions for how this pillow can be improved. Please tell me in the comments. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.